Hello again and welcome to another Mordy and Glory Warhammer 40k video. In today's episode, I want to ask and try and answer one simple question. Why is suddenly everyone saying that Guard is a top tier faction? You see, since the beginning of 10th edition, the general chit and, dare I say, chat around the internet water cooler has been that Guard isn't a very good faction in this edition. Most people have kind of disregarded the faction, and a lot of the attention and the limelight has been on the, well, truly oppressive factions such as the Eldar, and also we've had things like Necrons in more recent times with their Catan spam. But all of a sudden, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, that narrative has completely changed. It has turned upside down on its head. And now we are having multiple content creators, multiple competitive voices inside the community who are saying, Guard are a top tier faction. Guard are an army that have the capability to not only do well at RTTs and mid-sized GTs, but can even go the distance at things like super major GTs as well. Now, it would be easy to dismiss this if it wasn't for the fact that Guard not only seem to be talking the talk, but also walking the walk with a number of high profile results recently in the competitive scene. Not only have we seen Guard fairly consistently from the beginning of the edition kind of have a low win rate, but paradoxically at the same time bring home event wins, even if they have been relatively small, but in very recent times, as of the last month, we've seen Guard not only get into the top 8 at super major events, the biggest tournaments in the world, such as LVO, but we've also seen them actually win. Not just podium, not just make it to the final cut, but full-blown bring home the gold. And this was recently at the Beachhead Brawl, which was over 150 players, and an event that is renowned for being pretty sharky. So the big question is, what's changed? Why have Guard suddenly, seemingly overnight, gone from being shelf tier in everyone's minds to more and more voices saying that these guys are actually pretty good? Well, I'm going to throw in an M. Night Shyamalan twist here and say, really? Not much has changed for the faction at all. We're almost identical to where we were when we started. If anything, Guard has been a faction that has received several nerfs and shadow nerfs over the course of the last 8 months, the beginning of 10th. In fact, many of our artillery pieces and indirect fire options have been increased in points, and this is a result of indirect fire in general getting heavily nerfed in this meta. You've had things like the Whirlwind go up in points, so the Manticore went up in points. You've had things like the Night Spinner go up in points, so then the Manticore went up in points again. In fact, the Manticore now costs more than some of our Lehman Russ main battle tanks. And you've got the fact that that's just one artillery piece. You've got things like Basilisk, Earthshaker batteries, Medusa batteries, Field Ordnance batteries, which aren't even exclusively indirect fire. They've all gone up, and we've even seen things which aren't indirect fire, such as the Colossus, also get a points increase. However, it would be unfair, it would be remiss of me to not point out that there has been some points cuts as well. The Guard early on did receive 1 round of points decreases, and this did bring things like our Rogel Dawn battle tanks down a little bit, and we also saw rebalancing of some of the Lehman Russ tanks and also the super heavies. Truthfully, these points changes have certainly helped, but for every give there has been a take, and so overall I would say that the points changes really can't be pointed to as the number one reason why Guard has suddenly started shooting up in terms of competitive capability. And let's be honest here, most of these point changes came in months ago, in the very, very early days. If they were that impactful, we would have seen people talking about them and going wild about them, and the Guard would have skyrocketed up much sooner than this. So again, I don't think we can say it's the points changes. I think there's something else going on here. And I have a theory what that might be. Firstly, we need to go back to the end of 9th edition. After waiting 5 long years for a new codex, Imperial Guard finally got their 9th book. And it was good. It was very good. Lots of custom regiments, but most importantly, from a competitive point of view, lots of broken tactics and combos, such as the infamous Kazakin bomb. But sadly, we only got to use the codex competitively for about 3 months because we had to wait for the FAQ before most tournaments would allow it. And then 10th edition was announced and came out. Now this had 2 impacts. Primarily, you had a lot of people who were comparing the 10th edition index versus the 9th edition codex. Most people thought that the index came up short. All of those tactics that had been amazing in 9th no longer really translated over into 10th. The Dreadnought Unkillable Command Squad, the aforementioned Kazakin bomb, they were gone by the wayside. A lot of people thought, well, on the surface, this looks like a big downgrade, so I'm not really going to bother with it. But secondly, you had the human factor, which was people were quite disappointed. They were quite upset. They were quite bitter. A lot of players have been waiting to get into the Guard for a while, and they finally had a good excuse with the good codex and also with the refreshed models. And then GW just pulls the rug out from underneath them. And many people were like, well, you know what? I'm just not going to bother going any further with this army. I'll put it on the back burner for a bit. I've only just managed to work out what it does in 9th. We're coming into 10th now. I'll just go back to one of my other armies. I'll just play something else. I'll go to Marines. Marines are always solid, so we'll just go to that. And so you had quite a lot of people who had initially jumped on who then ended up getting off the hype train, albeit temporarily in most cases. But all of that is in the past now. And people have started coming back to the faction, and people have started playing around with them, getting their models out again. The negative feeling of 9th edition really is given away to just a focus on 10th edition. And so we're seeing people picking up their Guard armies once again and starting to get some use out of them. We're also seeing, as a whole, the player base become more skilled at 10th edition. Now, I'm not saying that suddenly everyone is becoming a 360 no-scope pro MLG tour bloody player. What I am saying is, as we've had a new injection of players with in general to 40k with the launch of the new edition, people have been getting to grips with it. They've been buying models, they've been learning what works and what doesn't, and so overall people are starting to make those more informed choices. And this leads me on to my second point. You see, not only are people getting to grips, generally speaking, with 10th edition, but specifically, people are starting to unlock the Guard. They're starting to figure out what makes it tick, what works, what doesn't, and what are the good and bad choices. And this is one of the biggest barriers when getting into Guard. There are so many choices. We are one of the few factions in the game that can rival the Space Marines for how many datasheets we have and how many options our individual datasheets have. For example, if you look at the Platoon Command Squad or the Cadian Command Squad, the backbones of the Imperial Guard Officer Corps, you will see a staggering amount of options. And this is just for a 5-man unit. You've got the officer, he can take a plasma pistol or a bolt pistol or a las pistol, or he can take a bolter, or he can take a power sword or a power fist, and that's just one model out of 5. We've then got a whole smorgasbord of individual special weapons. We've got medipacks, regimental standards, master voxes, and in the case of the Platoon Command Squad, do you want to give your guys las guns, or do you want everyone running around with las pistols and chain swords? And this is for a 60.1 order basic no-named character unit. And if you're new to Warhammer 40k, or even if you're a veteran but you're new to the Guard as a faction, and you've got little to go off, little battlefield knowledge to know which is the good options and which is the bad options, you very well may end up picking something which really isn't very good. And this is one of the weird quirks of the Guard. You can have an army that looks almost identical. You can have two units that on the surface look very, very similar, but in reality, they are going to perform wildly differently. To give you an example of this, let's look at a unit of Death Korps of Krieg. Let's say someone takes a blob of 20 of them. Nice big block of Death Korps of Krieg. Send in the next wave, all that kind of good stuff. Now, someone could build that unit, and they could give the sergeants las pistols or bolt pistols and chainswords, and then they could take a couple of voxcasters in there for the radios, and then they're like, well, we'll get some sniper rifles and some flamethrowers in there. And then you could build that exact same unit where every sergeant has got a plasma pistol and a power sword, and you have 6 special weapons in there: double plasma gun, double melter gun, and double grenade launcher. In theory, these are 2 20-man Death Korps of Krieg units, but in reality, the first loadout is a complete waste of time. Flamers and sniper rifles are suboptimal choices. Bolt pistols and chainswords really aren't good enough for 10th edition. You're going to be facing a lot of elite units. You need that AP, you need that extra firepower. And so you then turn to the second unit, which actually is, in my opinion, one of the best battle line options, not only in this faction, but in the entire of 40k. Long story short, as a new player, you can build a unit of Death Korps of Krieg, but depending on what weapons you give them, they're either going to be A tier or they're going to be shelf tier. And realistically, the only way you're going to find out which one is which is by playing the game. And it can take a long time for that knowledge and that understanding to percolate into a faction, especially if the general consensus is that they're not very good. There's going to be less people playing games with them. There's going to be less people unlocking that knowledge. But this is very much a zoomed in perspective, looking at the minute details. Let's bring out big picture for a moment, because it's not just upgrades that matter. It's the actual units that you choose. And there are lots of units in the Guard that look very similar and you might think are going to do the same job, but the reality is that you are making your list much less efficient by including them. For example, you might have an army that looks like a pretty solid hybrid Guard force. It's got 80 or so infantry, and it's got 3 or 4 main battle tanks, 2 or 3 artillery pieces, and enough orders to go around to give everything a good time. But then you actually get into it, and one of these lists, we'll say the bad one in this case, is running things like infantry squads, and is running things like Cadians, which are okay choices. In fact, I've started warming up to Cadians a lot more recently, but they're still what could probably consider to be the less efficient choices. And the tanks that they've gone for, they're focusing on maybe those tanks that were good in 9th and 8th edition. They've got like Lehman Russ Demolishers in there, but they're not really good enough. They're not that great in 10th edition. They're okay. They're still very powerful. Demolisher can still go and demolish, but you know, really there are better tanks than that now, and we'll get into that in a moment when we look at the good list. And you go to the artillery, and it's like, okay, they've got like field ordnance batteries, which are fine, but again, they're not the best artillery, the most points efficient one you can take. And then you go over to what might look like a very similar list, and yet it's just at every level that bit better. You've got Death Korps of Krieg and Kashchan Jungle Fighters. So you're spending the same points as the person that's gone down sort of the infantry squad and Cadian route, because they're 120 points per 20-man blob, and the Katachans are 110, but then the Kriegers are 130, which averages out to 120. But they're just better, because the Katachans can do screening better because they can scout move. When they die, it's less impactful because they're cheaper. They don't rely on orders as much because they're special weapons, just flames which auto hit. They have things like characters like Strachan, which can support them very cheaply and give them all the orders that they really need. So you've just got a much more efficient screening unit there. And then when it gets to the infantry that's going to be following up and holding the objectives and maybe doing a bit of damage as well, you've got the Kriegers, which, as we've seen, can bring an absolute boatload of special weapons. I mean, you can have 2 power swords, 2 plasma pistols, 2 plasma guns, 2 melta guns, 2 grenade launchers in a 130-point unit. And those Kriegers can bring back D3 guys to turn with the Medipack as well. We then go over to the tanks, and rather than having random shot, random damage Leman Russ Demolishers, we see people taking things like Leman Russ Exterminators, which have a fixed number of shots, which have flat damage 3, which act as a force multiplier. Their ability isn't just focused on themselves, they actually boost up the entire army. So not only are they a much more reliable vehicle, but they're also something that can help out the entire army list. And to boot, they're a bit cheaper. And rather than putting field orders batteries in the list, you could put Basilisk in there instead. Much more reliable shot count, better strength, better AP, and a fantastic ability, which again doesn't need to rely upon doing damage to achieve its aims. It can slow people down, which acts once more as a force multiplier. 2 armies. On the surface, identical. On the surface, both bringing everything that is required to make a successful hybrid guard list, and yet one from the top to the bottom, from the macro level, just general units, to all the way down to the individual upgrades, is just better, is just more efficient. But like I said earlier, it's not immediately obvious to a lot of people who are new to the faction the impact that these small yet significant changes can make. And this is compounded by what models people tend to get first. Because most people start with the combat patrol, or similar models to a combat patrol. And that includes Cadians and Field Ordnance batteries. Whereas the better choice is Death Corps and Basilisks. But if you're just building models that you have to hand, and you're building models that are getting you into the faction to start off with, and you're starting from the ground up, or you're buying models second hand, you tend to find it's much easier to find old Cadians or even new Cadians on places like eBay and Facebook Marketplace and buy and sell groups than it is to pick up, things like Basilisks and also the Death Corps. So it's just a simple case of, it's not just knowing the choices, it's about which direction and which place people often start from. So to bring all of this together, to try and refocus us, what I'm saying is Guard have been a strong faction from the beginning of 10th edition. A lot of our data sheets are very solid through and through. And we've kind of been overshadowed. We've kind of been going under the radar because the general consensus has been Guard aren't very good. So people haven't really had the incentive to dig into them that much. And also, we've seen other factions really get into the limelight. And it's taken people a while to unlock and understand the different bits and the right choices inside of the faction. Now, some of you might be finding this a little hard to believe, and you might be still a bit skeptical. Maybe it is just a flash in the pan. Who knows? But if I may, for a moment, and I know this is going to come across as a little bit egotistical, but I don't mean it in that way at all. I just want to use my own experiences and share my journey so far in 10th edition with the Guard, which has been extremely successful. Since 10th edition dropped, my competitive performance has gone up remarkably. And I would say I've got no better as a player. And in fact, most of the tournaments I've been to, I've been taking meme lists. You guys have seen things like the pure infantry spam, you've seen the double shadow sword, the armored company list, mechanized. I've not been taking the same list. I've not been getting well practiced, not been getting in lots of reps with the same list or the same style of Guard army each time. I've kind of just been taking lots of different cool stuff, and yet it's still been working. At the start of 10th edition, I went 17 games undefeated in a row competitively. I have never, ever done that before. I struggle to go more than 1 or 2 games in a row with victories. When it was 9th edition, my typical RTT performance would be 1 win, 1 loss, and then maybe a draw at the end. If it was a GT, I'd often go a win at the beginning in the random pairings, and then it would be like loss, and then it'd be like bloody hell, day 2, the pressure's on, and I'd be like, okay, try and get a couple of wins. But I had to fight every single step of the way to come out with a 50% win rate. I had to pull out all of my tricks, all of my tactics to just try and maintain any form of positive win-loss ratio. In 10th edition, I've been turning up with meme lists, I've been taking ogre and bang buses and all sorts of crazy stuff, and I've still been able to get wins. And I believe that there have been 3 simple reasons for why this has been possible. Firstly, I think the 10th edition guard index is really good. I think all of the datasheets are solid, and we have more efficient ones and less efficient ones, but as I have proven in some of my torn after action reports, you can go with the less efficient choices and still get a perfectly impressive, a perfectly adequate performance out of your units. You can go to tournaments with Cadians and do fine, if not do well. Secondly, I have got a bit more experience under my belt after going through the hellscape, which was 9th edition, just charging into tournament after tournament after tournament. It has allowed me to get a bit more of that knowledge and a bit more of that understanding on what is a good choice. You know, should we be taking flamers? Should we be taking grenade launch? Should we be taking plasma? Should we be taking melter? I have got that sort of knowledge now, and so I know that going for the plasma and the melter tends to be the better choice over going for things like the flamers and the sniper rifles. And lastly, and I think this is possibly one of the most important factors, I have quite an extensive model collection. Again, please, I don't want anyone going, oh, more than you stroking your ego, you won't be able to fit through the door, that your head's so large. I don't mean it in that way at all. I just really like the guard, and so I've essentially been almost exclusively, with a few tangents here and there, like Black Templars and Dean Silicol, essentially just collected guard. 20 years. I've still got the first models that I bought when I was 11 years old. And I've just been adding to that and building it and painting it and just remastering it when I needed to, bring the paint job up from 11-year-old Mordian's paint scheme to slightly better 30-year-old Mordian's paint scheme. It's not a big improvement, but trying to keep the army looking pretty. And my point is that this collection has grown. And now, when the edition changes, when the meta shifts, I am in the very fortunate position, and I do acknowledge that it is a fortunate and privileged position to be in, where if GW goes, oh, we're going to nerf Melter, I can go, that's fine, I'll go to Plasma. If GW says we're going to nerf Krieg, I can go, oh, that's fine, I'll move to Cadians. If GW says we're going to make Rogel Dawns better, I'm going to go, okay, I'll put my Lean Rusters on the shelf and I'll put my Rogel Dawns on the table. And so by being able to combine the good data sheets with the knowledge of what is the right choice, with having the Vrax Armory level collection to allow me to pivot quickly and almost immediately, it has allowed me to finally, for the first time, actually do well at tournaments. And just to move away from myself a moment, because I do appreciate it's a little uncomfortable when someone's just talking about how good they've been doing, and I don't mean it in that way, but moving swiftly on, it's not just myself which has had this performance, and it's also not just myself which has noticed this paradox, this big divide in the guard community. A lot of the people that were part of the MG community who have got collections which probably rival, if not are exceeding mine, have also found 10th edition to be an extremely good edition for the guard. And then we've also had a lot of people that have joined the community recently as the channel's been growing, and they've been saying, Morning, I just can't get wins with my guard. I'm 10 games deep and I just can't get the win. And this is where we do things on like the live streams, and I'm like, okay, well, send me a list in, and I'm getting to the point now where I will almost be able to predict exactly what's going to be in a new player's list, not like down to the individual units, but like the kind of vibe, the kind of style that the list is going to have. And it's going to have things like, drill commander as an enhancement in there. It's going to have choices like, infantry squads with like heavy bolters in there. And it's just one of the things where you've got this real example of how impactful the knowledge is, and how you've got this, like I said, this weird dichotomy that's going on where you've got two people who are running very similar army lists and having completely different results. But I think that just about covers it. In conclusion, the guard have recently been doing very well. and there has been some chit and chat about what has changed. And in my opinion, the guard has been solid from the beginning of 10th edition, but they've kind of been submarining, they've kind of been slept on, and now we are seeing people turn their attention to them, and the results are starting to come in. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Has guard been a sleeper? Have we always been good? Or has something else changed in the meta? Perhaps it's not necessarily that guard has got better, but other factions have been nerfed, and now it is our time to shine. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. And of course, if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, and they have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a big shout out to Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys so much. Your incredible generosity is a massive part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time, and it is a big driving force behind the channel. But I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.